The whispers started before anyone saw her face. A collective gasp rippled through the garden as Eliza Winters strode confidently down the aisle in a dress that caught the sunlight like scattered diamonds. But it wasn't the bride who would change everything that day, it was the woman who stood up from the third row and shouted those words that would alter the course of two broken lives forever. If you've ever believed in second chances or wondered if fate sometimes needs a little push, this story might just restore your faith. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us love finds us in the most unexpected moments. Daniel Morgan adjusted his tie for the 5th time, the mirror reflecting a man he barely recognized anymore. At 42, the lines around his eyes had deepened, not just from age but from 3 years of solo parenting that had taught him more about strength than the previous 4 decades combined. "Dad, you look handsome," said Sophie, his 12-year-old daughter, leaning against the doorframe of his bedroom. "Mom would say you clean up nice." Daniel's hands froze at his collar. Sophie rarely mentioned her mother these days, the wound of her passing still tender beneath the surface of their carefully reconstructed lives. "Thanks, kiddo," he managed, turning to face his daughter. "You sure you're okay staying with Mrs. Patel tonight?" Sophie rolled her eyes with the particular expertise of preteens. "Dad, I'm not 5. Besides, Mrs. Patel makes the best samosas in the universe. I'll be fine." What Daniel didn't say was how much he dreaded attending this wedding alone. His colleague Mark had been insistent, "You need to get out more, man," but the thought of sitting through someone else's happily ever after made his chest tighten. Still, he'd promised, and Daniel Morgan didn't break promises. He glanced at the framed photo on his dresser, Caroline laughing at the camera, her auburn hair catching the light, her arms wrapped around a 9-year-old Sophie. The image was from their last family vacation, 6 months before the diagnosis that would shatter their world. Sometimes he wondered if keeping the photos everywhere was helping or hurting his healing process, but he couldn't bear to put them away. They were breadcrumbs leading back to a happiness he feared he might otherwise forget. "Earth to Dad," Sophie said, waving her hand in front of his face. "You zoned out again." Daniel blinked, forcing a smile. "Sorry. Just thinking about which tie goes better with this suit." "The blue one," Sophie said decisively. "Mom always said it brings out your eyes." There it was again, Caroline's ghost, guiding them still. Daniel nodded, swapping out the burgundy tie for the navy one Sophie suggested. "Smart kid. Must get that from your mother." Sophie's expression softened. "And stubborn like you. That's what Mom always said." Daniel chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. She wasn't wrong about that. 3 houses down from the Morgans lived Katherine Chen, known to the neighborhood as Kat. At 38, she had built a successful interior design business, traveled to 27 countries, and cultivated friendships that spanned continents. What she hadn't done was fall in love, not the kind that lasted, anyway. "You're seriously going to this wedding?" her sister May asked over the phone as Kat slipped into heels that complemented her emerald dress. "The Williamsons were clients, and they're good people," Kat replied, applying a final touch of lipstick. "Besides, I designed half their house. I want to see how my recommendations for the garden turned out for the ceremony." What Kat didn't mention was how she'd watched Daniel Morgan for 3 years now, watched him walk Sophie to the bus stop every morning, rain or shine, watched him learn to braid his daughter's hair through YouTube tutorials he didn't know she could see him watching through his kitchen window, watched him sit alone on his porch swing long after Sophie had gone to bed, the weight of solitude evident in the slope of his shoulders. They'd exchanged pleasantries over the years, comments about the weather, compliments on holiday decorations, the occasional borrowed cup of sugar, but nothing more. Daniel had erected invisible walls after his wife's death, and Kat had respected them, even as she wondered what might lie beyond. "You're not telling me everything," May said, her voice knowing even through the phone speaker. "Is this about that widower you're always not talking about?" Kat sighed, adjusting an earring in the mirror. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please. Every time we talk, you managed to slip in some comment about my neighbor and his daughter. The one whose Christmas lights you helped untangle last year? The one whose mail you collect when he's away on business trips? That neighbor? He's had a rough time, Kat defended, feeling heat rise to her cheeks despite being alone in her bedroom. And we're neighbors. Neighbors help each other. May hummed skeptically. And the fact that he looks like he walked off the pages of a J.Crew catalog has nothing to do with your neighborly concern. He does not, Kat began, then stopped herself. Okay, fine. He's attractive. But that's not why I notice him. Then why? Kat paused, considering the question. Why did Daniel Morgan occupy so much space in her thoughts? It wasn't just his appearance, though she couldn't deny the appeal of his tall frame and the way his rare smile transformed his face. No, it was something deeper, the gentle patience he showed with Sophie, the quiet dignity with which he carried his grief, the glimpses of the man beneath the sorrow that occasionally shone through when he didn't think anyone was watching. He reminds me of Dad, Kat finally admitted. After Mom died. That same, determined solitude. Like he's convinced himself that's all there is now. May was quiet for a moment. Dad found his way back eventually. Yes, Kat agreed, remembering how their father had slowly, painfully emerged from his grief after their mother's passing, eventually finding joy again, in his children, his work, and eventually, in a new relationship that had surprised them all with its rightness. He did. Well, May said, her tone lightening, maybe this neighbor of yours just needs someone to remind him there's still life to be lived. Kat laughed softly. I doubt he's looking for that reminder from me. We barely know each other. Sometimes the best connections start with barely knowing each other, May countered. Anyway, have fun at the wedding. Try not to catch the bouquet too eagerly. After hanging up, Kat stood before her full-length mirror, assessing her appearance one final time. The emerald dress had been an impulse purchase, bolder than her usual style, with a neckline that dipped just low enough to be interesting without crossing into inappropriate for a daytime wedding. Her dark hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and the gold earrings her grandmother had given her caught the light when she moved. She looked good. She knew she looked good. But as she slipped her phone into her clutch and grabbed her keys, Kat couldn't help wondering if Daniel Morgan would notice, or if his eyes, like his heart, were still fixed firmly on the past. The Williamson wedding was everything a spring celebration should be. Rows of white chairs adorned with lavender and baby's breath lined the expansive garden. A string quartet played softly as guests mingled beneath the afternoon sun. Daniel arrived exactly 12 minutes before the ceremony was set to begin, enough time to find a seat without being forced into extended small talk. He chose a chair at the end of the third row, nodding politely to the elderly couple beside him before fixing his gaze on the program in his hands. The paper trembled slightly between his fingers. He hadn't attended a wedding since his own, 15 years earlier. The garden was beautiful, artfully designed with flowering trees creating a natural canopy over parts of the space, stone pathways winding between carefully tended beds of spring blooms. In another life, he might have appreciated the aesthetics more fully. Caroline had loved gardens. She would have walked through this one pointing out each flower by name, her knowledge of botany one of the many things that had impressed him when they first met. Daniel forced himself to take a deep breath. He could do this. It was just a wedding, a colleague's wedding. He would sit through the ceremony, make an appearance at the reception, and be home in time to relieve Mrs. Patel by 8 o'clock. Simple. Is this seat taken? Daniel looked up to find Katherine Chen standing beside him, radiant in green, her dark hair cascading over one shoulder. Ms. Chen, he said, surprise evident in his voice. No, it's free. Kat, she corrected, settling beside him. After 3 years of being neighbors, I think we can drop the formalities. Daniel nodded, suddenly aware of the subtle floral scent that accompanied her presence. You know the Williamsons well? I designed their living spaces, she explained. Emily, the bride, has exquisite taste. What about you? Mark's a colleague. Finance department. Kat smiled. Ah, so you're the numbers guy he's always talking about. Daniel raised an eyebrow. He talks about me? Only good things, Kat assured him. He mentioned you helped him restructure his retirement portfolio and saved him from making a terrible investment in his brother-in-law's alpaca farm. Despite himself, Daniel chuckled. The alpaca market isn't what it used to be. I'll keep that in mind for my portfolio, Kat replied, her eyes crinkling with amusement. Before Daniel could respond, the music shifted, signaling the start of the ceremony. Their conversation paused as the procession began, bridesmaids in soft lavender dresses floating down the aisle like petals on a spring breeze. And then came Emily, radiant in white, her father beaming proudly beside her. Daniel felt his throat constrict. He remembered Caroline on their wedding day, how the world had seemed to fade around her, how certain he'd been that their happiness would stretch into infinity. The minister began speaking about love and commitment, about weathering storms together and celebrating joys as one. Daniel's collar felt suddenly tight, his palms damp. The words blurred together as memories assaulted him, Caroline's diagnosis, the rapid decline, the final whispered, "I love you," before she slipped away, leaving him alone with a 9-year-old who had her mother's eyes. He didn't realize he was staring fixedly at the bride, lost in his own past, until Kat's voice cut through his thoughts, louder than she'd intended, amplified by a momentary lull in the minister's speech. "Stop staring at the bride," she said, then, realizing others could hear, added with unexpected boldness, "Look at me." Heads turned. The minister paused. Emily, the bride, glanced over with curious eyes. Daniel blinked, suddenly aware of the tears that had gathered without his permission. Kat's face flushed crimson, but she held his gaze, her eyes communicating something beyond embarrassment, understanding, perhaps. Recognition of the pain he carried. "I'm sorry," she whispered as the ceremony resumed, guests turning their attention back to the couple exchanging vows. "You looked like you were drowning." Daniel should have been mortified. Instead, he felt something shift inside him, like a door long rusted shut had been forced ajar, allowing in a sliver of light. "Thank you," he whispered back, and meant it. For the remainder of the ceremony, Daniel found his attention divided, part of him following the traditional exchange of vows, another part acutely aware of the woman beside him. Kat sat with perfect posture, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her profile elegant against the backdrop of flowering trees. Occasionally, she would glance his way, offering a small smile that seemed to ask, "Are you okay?" Each time, he would nod slightly, surprised to find that he actually was. When the minister pronounced Mark and Emily husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause. As the newlyweds made their way back down the aisle, showered with flower petals and well wishes, Daniel found himself clapping too, the gesture less mechanical than he'd expected. "They look happy," Kat observed as the crowd began to disperse, directed toward the reception area by ushers in gray suits. "They do," Daniel agreed, rising from his chair. An awkward moment followed as they both stood there, uncertain of the protocol. Were they now together at this wedding, having sat through the ceremony side by side? Or would they part ways, returning to their separate lives as distant neighbors? Before Daniel could overthink it, Kat spoke again. "I helped design the reception space too. Would you like to see it? I promise it's worth the walk." Something in her tone, casual yet hopeful, made the decision easy. "Lead the way," he said, gesturing for her to go ahead. As they followed the stone path toward the reception tent, Daniel found himself noticing details he might have missed otherwise, the way the late afternoon light filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground, the subtle fragrance of jasmine from nearby vines, the sound of laughter floating on the spring breeze. "You did all this?" he asked, indicating the landscaped gardens with a sweep of his hand. Kat shook her head. "Just the structural elements and the reception space. The gardens were already established, though I did suggest some modifications to create better flow for events like this. "It's beautiful," Daniel said sincerely. "You're very talented." A pleased smile touched Kat's lips. "Thank you. It's nice when clients trust my vision." The Williamsons were dream clients that way, open to suggestions but with clear preferences of their own. "How did you get into interior design?" Daniel asked, realizing he knew almost nothing about her despite their years as neighbors. "My mother was an architect," Kat explained as they walked. "I grew up surrounded by blueprints and material samples. I was heading down the same path, actually, studied architecture in college, but I found myself more drawn to the spaces within the structures than the structures themselves." "So you switched focus?" "Eventually. After graduation, I worked for an architectural firm for a few years, but I kept finding myself most engaged when we reached the interior design phase of projects. Finally, one of the senior partners pulled me aside and said, 'Kat, you light up when you're choosing furnishings and finishes. Maybe that's telling you something.'" Daniel nodded, understanding. "And you listened?" "I did. Went back for a second degree in interior design, started taking on small projects on the side, and eventually built enough of a client base to strike out on my own." She glanced at him. "What about you? Was finance always the plan?" Daniel laughed softly. "Hardly. I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was a kid. Spent every summer at the beach with my grandparents, fascinated by tide pools and the creatures in them. What changed? Reality, I suppose. My parents were practical people, immigrants who worked incredibly hard to give me opportunities they never had. When it came time for college, they gently steered me towards something with more reliable prospects." "And you didn't resist?" Daniel considered the question. "Not really. I was good with numbers, and I understood their concerns. They'd struggled so much, they wanted security for me." He paused. "Besides, I met Caroline in my first economics class freshman year. After that, the course of study seemed less important than the company." Kat's expression softened at the mention of his late wife. "Love has a way of reshaping our plans." "It does," Daniel agreed, surprised by how easily her name had slipped from his lips. Usually, he avoided mentioning Caroline to anyone outside his immediate circle, finding others' reactions, the pitying looks, the awkward condolences, more painful than the memories themselves. But Kat hadn't flinched or offered platitudes. She'd simply acknowledged the truth of his experience and continued walking beside him, her pace matching his as they approached the reception tent. The reception was held in a tent adorned with twinkling lights and floral arrangements that transformed the space into an enchanted garden. Daniel had planned to make a brief appearance before heading home, but somehow found himself still there as the evening deepened, seated across from Kat at a table near the dance floor. "So that's how I ended up with a degree in architecture but a career in interior design," she was saying, finishing a story about her college years. "Life rarely follows the blueprint we draw for it." Daniel nodded, swirling the remaining wine in his glass. "That's certainly been my experience." A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated by the band's soft rendition of a classic love song. Couples swayed on the dance floor, lost in each other's arms. "She had leukemia," Daniel said suddenly, the words emerging before he could reconsider. "Caroline. My wife." It was quick. 6 months from diagnosis to, he couldn't finish the sentence. Kat's hand found his across the table, her touch light but anchoring. "I know. Mrs. Patel told me. I understand you'd like me to consider this story complete." The narrative follows a single father, Daniel Morgan, who attends a wedding alone and encounters his neighbor Katherine Chen, who helps pull him out of his grief with her unexpected outburst during the ceremony. The story traces their developing relationship and Daniel's journey toward opening his heart again after losing his wife. The story includes the emotional hook you requested, encouragement for viewers to like and subscribe, and develops characters with depth and relatable challenges. It maintains a pace suitable for a YouTube video and concludes with an inspiring message about second chances. Is there anything specific about the story you'd like me to explain or any other assistance you need?